really grateful for Dr. Klau, Max, for joining us for this webinar. Looking forward to our dialogue. Just want to acknowledge those of you who are here live, and also acknowledging those of you who are watching the recording or will watch the recording of this conversation. I'm excited about this dialogue because I've known Max, I've known Dr. Cloud for over a decade now, and I've been able to see his thinking and his research and his leadership in the field expand and grow. And when I heard about his work, his recent development in regards to the Center for Courageous Wholeness, I was really inspired. I was really inspired by the framework and by the concept, courageous wholeness. It just felt like a really refreshing framing that is very useful right now when the world is um, changing so fast in front of us, from technology to politics to business to the environment. And it just feels like right now, more than ever before, we need as many tools with which to interpret, train, and evolve. So, with that being said, I'd love to welcome Brother Max into the space. How are you? How are you feeling? How are you arriving?
I am very grateful to you, Angel, and also to the Garrison Institute for hosting this, and just very excited for this conversation. It's been my life's work, and it's really exciting that it's kind of coming out into the world at this time in this way. So glad to be here.
Yeah, yeah, brother. I've been able to watch you evolve in the field in a variety of ways. I even before I got my doctorate, you and I kind of crossed paths
Yep.
at the International Leadership Association. So, I've kind of admired just the ways in which you've been able to take leadership and human development, and kind of added your own twist. Could you tell just the audience a little bit about your background, and then I'd love to just jump right dive into courageous wholeness. But yeah, just giving folks a little bit of context about around who you are from your perspective.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Well, and the feeling is mutual, Angel. It's been amazing to watch you kind of your career and your impact grow over the years.
Mm.
So I always start by saying I'm a service person. I'm an alum of four different service programs, and I've led service in uh, Ghana and Honduras and Israel and Ukraine, and just kept going back to service programs because it felt I felt spiritually at peace when I was being of service. And the other
Mhm.
theme in my life was being a lost idealist in my 20s, of just really feeling this burning passion to do good and have a positive impact and just not knowing what direction to go in. And those two themes kind of wove together to get me to where I am today. So I ended up in my mid 20s going to grad school. I went to a school of education, and that was where I discovered the adaptive leadership model at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, which I didn't realize there was a field of leadership, and it certainly just completely changed my life and changed the way I understood the work of leadership and how change happens. And I ended up getting a doctorate and really going deep into. I always talked about the macro and the micro of keeping a dual focus on both the macro, the system, how do systems change or more frequently resist change, and then the micro, the inner life of somebody who is trying to do good in the world, and really tried to understand the relationship between inner and outer change. And that
Mm.
led to my first book, which is called Race and Social Change, A Quest to Study a Call to Action. And that was my dissertation. But after graduating, I ended up at City Year, which is an AmeriCorps program. So young adults doing a year of really demanding service in high need schools, keeping students kind of supporting their academic and social and emotional success. And it's a big organization. When I got there, it was already in 15 cities and had about 1,500 core members, AmeriCorps members. And the thing I thought I could contribute that they didn't quite have was a consistent kind of scalable approach to giving every AmeriCorps member a chance to turn inwards and pay attention to their own inner journey while they are doing this really demanding year of serving others. So it
Hmm.
took me a long time, and this is what my new book is about, is it took years to figure out, how do you create an organizational capacity to invite people into inner development that is really deep, but is also scalable. And it just
Hmm.
took a long time to figure it out. But thanks to the patience of City Year, they kept giving me chances to continue to experiment. And I finally kind of built a model that worked. And on the basis of that, I was recruited to become the chief program officer at an organization called the New Politics Leadership Academy, which
Hmm.
was a nonpartisan organization focused on bringing servant leaders into politics. So military vets or people who had done Peace Corps or AmeriCorps service programs. And could we get more of them to serve again in the kind of toxic, polarized space of American politics? And 7 years there, and I built from scratch this organizational capacity to guide thousands of people through kind of that inner discernment process of what do I feel called to do? What does it mean for me to confront my shadow? What does it mean to
Hmm.
really find my path of service? And on the basis of all that, I felt like we just need this. One of the key insights from my work with at New Politics was all these incredibly high achieving, highly credentialed people had never heard of shadow and were really kind of unskilled around being with their wholeness. And I just felt
Hmm.
like at this moment when there's these poly crises that you referred to, all of it is what we're doing all of it to ourselves. And if we could
Hmm.
work more skillfully with our wholeness, that is what we need to do if we're going to evolve beyond these dynamics we're creating. So anyway, I'll pause there.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. Yes, we have two things to hold here. We have the book,
Hmm.
you know, developing servant leaders at scale, and then we also have courageous wholeness as a concept. Um, let's go into courageous wholeness for the folks listening. Like, what is it? Like, what is it? And what do you feel like are the core principles of it? And then we'll just kind of just wrestle a little bit there.
Yeah, I mean, the definition that I'm working with here at the center is it's a practice of owning our light, confronting our shadow, and serving others. And so it's those
Hmm.
kind of three themes of one is we got to connect with our kind of highest aspirations for how we want to be. But that's not enough to just to connect with the light. We also have to turn and confront our shadow, which is who are we when we are not aligned with our mission? If we are not being who we say we aspire to be, how are we being? And it's very uncomfortable to look at, but all of us
Hmm.
have that. And all of us have to learn to work skillfully with it. And, I do believe when you connect with your highest kind of values and your highest self, you end up at this place of I need to find a way to be of service. And so you put all of that together and we own our light, we confront our shadow, and we find a way to use whatever gifts and skills we have to be of service to others. So that's the essence of the idea.
Yeah, it seems like even though courageous wholeness is a new um, kind of a framework and kind of a new way of thinking about a refreshed way of thinking
Right.
about
Right.
leadership, our inner life, inner work as it relates to social change, and I'm thinking about so many leaders who have been exemplars of courageous wholeness in the past. So it's not necessarily something new. It's something that's refreshed and kind of repackaged in a way to meet the temper of the times. Um, so tell me more about why is inner work so important when it comes to societal change?
Yeah. Well, first, you've said it's refreshed. These ideas are ancient. Wholeness is
Hmm.
ancient. There is this
Hmm.
is the story we've been telling ourselves and working on since caveman times. And it's
Hmm.
one of the reasons why I'm so feel so called to this is because it is so timeless and also so urgent, you know.
Hmm.
Um, but in terms of your question around inner work, all of my years of academic efforts to understand how social change happens. My first book was trying to understand how does this process of large scale social change unfolds. And it really arrived at this place that resonates with what I started encountering in the leadership literature, which is that the world around us is really a reflection of the world within us. And
Mm,
Otto Scharmer has this quote he talks about that the success of any leadership intervention is based on the inner condition of the leader. And
mm,
really, this sense of there's something about our inner way of being that calls forth the world around us. And through my academic studies and my years of kind of practical work in this, I have just begun to realize how profoundly true that is. That
mhm,
the world around us is actually a reflection of our inner way of being. And when we shift our way of being, that is actually the only way that we start calling forth different things. And this illusion that we're separate from the world or that we can, interact from it with it from a place of objectivity or disconnection an illusion. And I really feel like we've hit the limits of living in that misunderstanding, you know?
mm,
Um,
mm,
and I will shout out, there's a global movement now called the Inner Development Goals,
mhm,
which grew out of the Sustainable Development Goals, the UN's 17 goals, really ambitious goals to, impact social issues. And they realized we're not moving fast enough. And the reason that we are not having the impact we need to have is because we have not been as rigorous about the inner transformation we need to cultivate in the people trying to create these changes. Just around the world,
mhm.
we've realized we can't move the needle on pressing public problems without holding both the inner and the outer together.
Yeah. Well, you and I have been in dialogue for a while now, and so I kind of want to ask some hard questions actually before we
All
talk
right.
about scale. Is that
What do you
okay?
got? Yeah.
Let me roll my
Oh
non-existent
boy.
sleeves. My non-existent sleeves, brother. You know, I this morning, I'm really connected to the field of artificial intelligence in
Yeah.
terms of its development.
Yeah.
And so my question is not necessarily about technology per se, but it's just about the speed of change and the structure and fabric of our society. There was this kind of concept over the last like 4 or 5 years around being
Huh.
a post-truth moment where
Yeah.
because of social media and because of the polarizing politics evident not just nationally in the US but also globally, and that meeting the algorithmic nature of our social media filled lives, more and more of us kind of can stay in our bubbles and stay in these like
Yeah.
highly curated lives and ideas and ideologies that oftentimes reinforce and
Yeah.
confirm our own biases, and
Yeah.
creating what would be a post-truth moment where truth
Hmm.
is like what are you depending on the community you're discussing, and even the truth, capital T, minor
Yeah.
t, would lead, because depending on the community you're in or your political belief or ideological beliefs will result in possibly misinformation.
Yeah.
And so there's post-truth, and then recently, actually today, a leading AI figure, Sunid Bowl, was talking about we're entering a post reality era. So which is interesting, is a difference from
Mm.
post-truth to post-reality.
Yeah.
And I do understand the fundamental premise that reality already is being shaped so much by the digital world, by the ways in which the post-truth moment was shaping politics, shaping culture, shaping society,
Yeah.
and that these technologies that are emerging, kind of clashing with this polarized moment, are creating
Mm.
a post-reality where reality itself becomes like not just truth but reality. And I'm just really curious around
Yeah.
what is a relationship to wholeness when reality becomes a question. Like what is a relationship, what is the role of shadow in a post-reality moment? So I'm just kind of asking you a very
Yeah.
hard question,
Well, I
because
appreciate it.
and then the last thing I'll say, and I'm being
Yeah.
playful here, that if we're going to do shadow work, or at least true shadow work, for societal transformation, in a world where reality becomes more and more synthetic,
Mm,
then what are the this, and I like what you said earlier, like developing this discernment for inner knowing.
yeah.
What are, I think, the skills that we're gonna have to develop moving forward are gonna have to be so sophisticated, because we're gonna have to even be able to determine whether the very shadow we're deconstructing is even grounded in the kind of reality that's real. I'm just being playful here. You and I have been in dialogue for so long, so I wanted to throw a kind of
Yeah, yeah,
a
yeah.
grenade at you,
Well,
unprompted. Everybody, bear with me.
yeah, no, I appreciate it. And it's one of the reasons why I feel called to launch the center, because I do feel like wholeness is at the absolute heart of this fracturing of truth and fracturing of reality. And to say that a little, explain that in a little more detail, Carl Jung, who wrote a lot about the shadow, and a lot of my understanding is really influenced by him. And, the first idea is of shadow is that all of us have this idealized version of ourselves of, there's the socially acceptable and not just socially, also to our own selves of this is our ideal understanding of who we are. And there's anything that doesn't fit into that gets shoved out of our consciousness. So if we don't like to think that we're controlling or angry, we shove that out of our consciousness. Or for some men, if we don't like to think that we're kind and compassionate, or it's not okay to be that, it gets shoves into our unconscious. There's all kinds of stuff that gets put back there. But Carl Jung says the fact that it's out of our consciousness doesn't mean it doesn't have power anymore, right? It influences us beyond our awareness. And so the work of wholeness is to turn and confront that, which is scary, which is why work is courageous, right? And when we take a look at that, it forces us to shift and really possibly really dramatically reshape our understanding of who we are and kind of how we show up in the world, you know?
Yeah.
Now, until we have done that work, we kind of live in an illusion. Like we
Mhm.
only understand part of ourselves, and we are very committed to maintaining this illusion that cannot be with the whole truth, you know?
Mhm.
So it is a condition of partial truth within ourselves, you know? And the other thing that Carl Jung says is when we haven't done that work, then we end up projecting all of that darkness outside into some other. And it's like the inability to be with the truth of our wholeness within ourselves makes it impossible to see the truth of the world around us, right? So we suddenly have there's the dehumanized others who are the source of all evil, and I am purely good and great, and
Mhm.
and I'm open to all kinds of crazy ideas about stories that reinforce that falseness that rests at the very center
Mhm.
on our inability to see our own internal wholeness, you know?
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
and I've realized I'm an integral master coach trained, by the work of Ken Wilber, who writes a lot about this. There's a
Mhm.
particular level of consciousness that we've hit where we have this kind of the idea that there's no truth, and we are clearly seeing the limits of that. And what I've realized
Mhm.
is truth, everything in life has both an inner and outer dimension. And when we're talking about being with reality, it has to include two things. One is searching for the truth in the world outside of us. And, the truth is not always like a simple, clear thing, but we have to be genuinely engaged in trying to understand what is happening. And
Mhm.
you can see people who want to, ban books or shut down science or just, I refuse to engage with any processes that will get me closer to truly understanding the world outside of me. And then along with that is how am I being in my inner world? Am I coming from
Mhm.
a place of grievance,
Mhm.
from anger, from the kind of dark emotions, or coming from a place of um, love and connection and
Mhm.
and that. And so you have the search for truth in the outer world and the search for truth in the inner world, and they're connected. And if we have not done our wholeness in our inner world, we cannot see the truth outside of us. And so what we see now is that's where we live right now. There's a very limited, it's the reason why I feel called to start this center is we just need more people who understand this inner work and how it relates to our civic lives, you know? Um,
hmm
so the technology we have right now is just amplifying our current level of consciousness, which is,
Yeah.
does that make sense? Is that a,
Yeah, no,
yeah.
that makes sense. That makes sense. And now that we're at the center, tell us a little bit about the center. So we have this. So this is really, for me, a historical moment in regards to the field. So everyone who's watching and everyone who's here live, like this is a big moment for the field because as much as the Center for Courageous Wholeness was recently launched, this moment at the Garrison Institute and Monique, you'll be a footnote in this, so you can hold the notes around the history of the institute. But this is one of the first major spaces where the
Yeah.
world knows about the Center for Courageous Wholeness. So everyone, just a digital clap for you and for the birth of the Center for Courageous Wholeness. Just before we transition into a little bit deeper dialogue, tell us a little bit about the center and your vision for it.
Yeah. So, it's an educational institution that is dedicated to helping purpose-driven individuals and organizations achieve greater wholeness by courageously integrating shadow, serving others, and scaling up their impact. So that's the mission statement. And, I've
Hmm
realized there's a little bit of a like my journey behind this, which
hmm
I began as a service person. I began like I work at the grassroots. I'm a youth worker. There's this kind of moral purity to this. You know, I'm there at the grassroots helping kids.
hmm
And I spent 10 years at City Year. I did a lot and started to realize, you know, City Year was doing everything right. They were working so hard and getting measurable, like serious, proving their impact with rigorous results and doing everything you can from a service level. And every year or two, there was the threat of their budget being zeroed out. And
hmm
eventually you just see clearly if you really care about something at some point, you need political power. You need power.
hmm
Because if people don't believe in what you're doing and they have power, they can just shut it down. So that is
hmm
what led me to go to New Politics, where I took a deep dive into how does political power work in America? Like, how do you get it? How do you govern with it? What are the inner challenges of being with it? And
hmm
learned a lot from that. But also what I saw there is um, we do a pre and post test for our program where we talk about light and shadow. And with the pre-test, there was a question of, I feel clear about my leadership mission, which is our light. And the pre-test was 73% agreed, and it went up to about 86% or 85% on the post-test. So, like a 12-point jump. But when we
hmm
asked them clear about my shadow mission, the pre-test was 33%, and it went up to 83%, a 50%
hmm
jump and
hmm
easily the most significant shift created by this work. And I tell this story all the time of there were a lot of amazing people in these programs, but one person stuck out. He was graduated from a military academy, was in elite special forces, and when I encountered him when he joined our programs, he was getting his master's of public administration in Ivy League university and was thinking about running for Congress and had the credentials and the biography and the networks to one day be a viable candidate for that. And he had never heard of Shadow, and he had never been
hmm
invited to his mission statement. And this is somebody who has been through America's most formative leadership development institutions, you know.
mm
And when he did his shadow mission, he looked at it. He said, I've never thought about this before, and my shadow is every politician I hate.
mm
And that happens a lot.
mm
That's just one example, but many of the people who were truly exceptional souls, who had lived lives of courage and character and integrity and service, and were seriously thinking about stepping up to wield power, had just not heard about this. And I felt like
hmm
the next step is we need to bring this idea into the culture in a
hmm
more powerful way because I keep saying it, we've hit the limits of our ability to respond to the crises unfolding
hmm
around us without recognizing it is flowing from our blindness to our wholeness.
Yeah.
It's flowing from our lack of connection to our whole selves. So
Yeah.
that's the center is can we help more individuals and institutions understand this work and do it skillfully?
Yeah. No, I agree. I think that there's something to shadow work that is really important right now for us to kind of wrestle with. Um, Wanted to debating whether because I have one more really hard question.
Oh, bring it, Angel, bring it. What do you got?
I
What do you got?
have I have one more really hard question, but I also want to transition into thinking about this work at scale. So I'm just kind of sensing into my body in terms of whether I want to do this to you or not. Well, since I'm in good company with my people at the Garrison Institute,
Yeah, yeah.
let's give you a hard question. Let's give you a hard question. So, you and I share um, many things, but one of them is an academic lineage, which is leadership studies.
Yeah.
You and I can kind of nerd out
We
talking
can.
about
We
the
can.
last 100 years of leadership theory and
Yeah.
research and practice from
Yeah. These are my
the great.
books. Yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, all of those leadership books, from the great man theory of leadership to, as you mentioned earlier, adaptive leadership, quantum
Mhm.
leadership. I had a time studying all those theories.
Yeah.
However, one of the things that I found really as an interesting phenomenon that's still, I think, present in the field is the limits of leadership development. And by that, I mean, you know, what is leadership development outside of the context within leadership is being exercised, right? So the assumption here is that you can go through some kind of workshop or some kind of maybe simulation of the conditions within which you lead, and all of a sudden you develop leadership skills. I just always found a really interesting gap between leadership development training, leadership development practices,
Yeah.
leadership development theory, and sometimes the very context within which leaders actually lead.
Mm.
And it's been always kind of a tension for me. Um, and I think that shadow work,
Yeah.
shadow work really is a nice bridge. So, what's the role? What's obviously you've articulated the value of shadow work,
Yeah.
but I'm just kind of really thinking about the role and value of shadow work in really providing leaders with the kinds of trainings, practices, exercises that does the necessary soul inner work
Yeah.
that can really catalyze how they actually show up in their positions.
Yeah. I love that. I'm going to see if I can share a slide. Um, so I appreciate the question. So after years, this is one of the things I write about in my book is trying to understand how do we conceptualize leadership development in a way that illuminates the relationship between inner development and our impact in the world. So give me a thumbs up. Are people able to see this slide here? Yeah, so this is called the flame. And it emerged through years of trial and error of finding different ways to conceptualize leadership. And so this is what I arrived at. And it looks really simple. It's like four elements. Like it does not look like a big deal, but it really solved a bunch of problems. And, so the four elements are first, the handle of the torch is organizational culture and values. And, we are shaped by the organization we're immersed in. And then there's the things we do is the outer level, the action we take in the world. But that is influenced by what we know. And that's about learning and skills and competencies, all that. But then there's that innermost B level of the flame. And the shadow work shows up at the B level of the flame. And I think there's a lot in leadership theory that is about what are the skills and knowledge and competencies people need. There's a lot of focus on the know, you know, and obviously a lot of do. And if you have a doctorate in leadership, there's a lot of people talking about kind of our way of being. But I do have
Hmm.
to say, I have not seen a lot of practical applications of that in big organizations, which is what I've been
Hmm.
working on, you know? And,
Yeah.
I'm very influenced by the idea that every truth is partial, like it can be true and partial.
Hmm.
To throw out every other idea and say this is the only truth, but I do think this work is about how do we complement all the things that organizations do, all the ways people think about leadership with a really powerful, proven approach to developing people at that innermost B level of the flame,
Hmm.
you know?
Hmm.
And that
Yeah.
is where you get to wholeness and shadow, and also just cultivating our character and living with integrity to our values, and recognizing that, that is not skill building, that is not knowledge
Hmm.
transfer, that is a journey of inner transformation that people can be invited into, but you can't do it with them, and you can't do it for them, and it's not a simple technical piece of work.
Yeah. 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 So precisely there, let's go a little bit into, doing this at scale, and then we'll invite the community to begin to
Right.
share with some questions, some comments. We have some questions that are already coming in. So those of you who are here live, be prepared to either share a comment or a question, either via your voice or the chat, or the Q&A feature. But yeah, talk to me about this at scale.
Yeah. This is the story I start the book with. Was I arrived at City Year, which is this, big national service organization, with this deep belief from both my academic studies of leadership and my own personal experience that you just can't develop leaders without reflection. It's just not possible. Um, and because City Year was focused on such like intense, we were trying to address the high school dropout crisis. There was a lot of urgency and intensity to it. And a lot of people were like, reflection's really nice, but we just don't have time for that, that was kind of the first obstacle, was this insistence that there's too much urgent stuff to do to make time for this thing that's important but not urgent. And pretty quickly we
Hmm.
could get past that. Pretty quickly we were able to, an hour every other week, we were able to make time for it. But then what we discovered was that people hated it. Like
Hmm.
it because we had not figured out how to create these spaces powerfully, people went to this place of just venting and complaining, and people were saying,
Hmm.
"This is destroying my idealism. This is a horrible waste of time." You know, so it's clear that you can't just, this is not easy stuff. You can't just say, "Here's an hour to think deep thoughts and have it be awesome and productive." There has to be a way to set these spaces up and hold them, you know? And the other thing that happened is when we started creating these spaces and we kept experimenting with how might we bring the right kind of structures and the right kind of framing, and it kept getting better and better. We would try things, but what we found
Hmm.
was about 10% of AmeriCorps members loved this. I think they were introverts who were so excited to have a place for kind of inner wisdom to surface. I think 80% were just like, they didn't hate it, but they didn't love it. They understood there was some value, and they were able to be in there. And then 10% hated this reflection space. It was absolutely, they were like enraged that the organization was like telling them they had to do this, and they were sure that anything else they were doing would be a better experience. And in these reflection spaces, the learning we're trying to create is very fragile. And so if you have one or two people who are just like actively resistant, it makes it really hard for this thing to be productive. And it took a while to figure out, like, I was like, if we don't figure out how to shift that, this is just going to go away. Like,
Hmm.
it's really not good. And I
Hmm.
fortunately had a chance to encounter a kind of a luminary in the field of leadership, and talk to him about this. And his response was jujitsu. You need to
Hmm.
stop resisting that energy, and you need to work with it. And so instead of
Hmm.
saying you have to reflect, here's an hour, you have to reflect, we realized we had to shift to a language of invitation, of
Hmm.
we believe that there's a whole inner dimension to what is going on, and we invite you to spend some time being with it. And if you don't want to do this work, you don't have to. I mean, you have to be in the space, and we ask you to respect your colleagues who are willing to do this, but we know that you can't be forced to do this. And it
Hmm.
was the piece that shifted everything.
Hmm.
Because when we stopped saying you have to do this, the resistance went away. And actually over time, we started to see that some of these haters, seeing their peers having such meaningful conversations and kind of breakthrough insights, the haters, some of them started to turn into real fans of like, wow,
Hmm.
you know? Um,
Hmm.
and then we had to help everybody, people in the organization learn how to create these spaces for these kinds of conversations. And that was the
Hmm.
organizational capacity to hold space that,
Hmm.
took years to figure out. How do you train people to even understand the work of holding space?
Hmm.
So anyway, it gives you a quick, a quick overview of the progress of kind of obstacle after obstacle that we had to get past in order to
Yeah.
create a model that actually worked with thousands of people, even the cynics and the skeptics who would be willing to be present for this.
Yeah. So I have a couple of people who are going to watch this, and a couple that are live here who run large organizations that are mission driven
Yeah.
and have this position of being able to drive change at scale, both internally in terms of the size of the organization and
Yeah.
the kind of leaders that are there and people that are there, and then also externally with the kind of mission they're trying to operationalize
Yeah.
in the real world. So any before we transition to Q&A from the community, any any one or two like real tactical things, practical things they can do, begin to do immediately, to kind of to develop servant leadership um, at scale within their organization, and of course, like embedded in that is like activating courageous wholeness in a way.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that. And I will say the book, that's the primary audience of the book, is people who are in a position to shape kind of an organization-wide approach to
Mhm.
development. Um, and I will say, there's no simple technical answers. I do think if you haven't done your own shadow, if you haven't looked at your own shadow and done some work around that, you can't hold a space for others.
Mhm.
One of the things I've learned from this work is that the inner way of being of the authority figures really
Mhm.
creates kind of a social field of what is possible in an
Mhm.
organization, And so having senior leaders who are doing this work and understands working with shadow and trying to work skillfully with their wholeness, that's kind of a journey that they have to do. And another piece I'll bring in here is one of the things I've learned is being able to hold organizations as kind of Newtonian systems, like organizations as
Mhm.
machines with
Mhm.
org charts and lines of, direct reports and like all of that. And, you know, we need to work skillfully with it. But we have to realize that every organization is also a living system. And there's a whole science of living systems, of complexity theory and chaos theory and how living systems work that operates on completely different principles from Newtonian physics. And so what senior leaders need to do is to be able to hold both of these things. Because if you want to develop leaders at the B level of the flame, if you want them to work with their wholeness, then it involves creating spaces and trusting people to turn inwards and work with their own inner wisdom. And
Mhm.
something about the Newtonian worldview that is so focused on direction and control and needing to manage that it makes that work really impossible. It actually kind of
Mhm.
makes that work go away. I often say
Mhm.
the Newtonian rules, Newton said that everything is flowing towards entropy. Like if we do not put in hard work and direction and control, everything is going to fall apart. Everything's going to
Mhm.
go to chaos. That is
Mhm.
not the way living systems work. The science of living systems is that they'll self-organize and they have their own inner
Mhm.
purpose and can be generative and creative. And it's not like throw out all the structure and get rid of all the systems. That's naive and that is not the way this works. But we do need to recognize that focus on direction and control and that whole assumption about this is how the world works, we need to bracket it. We need to recognize it's only a partial understanding of how people,
Hmm.
how the world works. And so we are comfortable opening up spaces and allowing spaces that are designed on how living systems work. And we can
Hmm.
thrive in parallel, because what I found,
Yeah.
if senior leaders have not kind of arrived at that consciousness, have not seen how that works, then they will just kind of consistently create resistance to or shut down spaces that allow people to do their own kind of B-level work.
Yeah.
I'll pause there.
Yeah. Yeah, you kind of just laid out so many of the powerful tensions and insights from the leadership studies canon. So just thank you for that. And also kind of even like it was subtle, but the classic tension between management and leadership, you know, management is not leadership. And oftentimes leadership is not management. Um, Leadership is something different where you're casting a vision, you're trying to move people along, and it's deeper work than just managing. So no, just thank you for that.
Yeah.
Wanting to wanting to bring the audience in here, wanting to bring the audience in here and kind of hear uh their voices. There was one a couple questions that came in. I'll ask both of them out loud here. And then those of you who have a question and are here live, please raise your hand. We definitely want to hear your voice. We definitely want to hear your voice, and also respect if you just want to ask a question um, in the chat or make a comment. But we'll try to get to it. And This one colleague said that she fully resonates with the framework of courageous wholeness. And however, in the work many of us do, especially in systems or teams where others may not be engaged in their own shadow work,
Right.
execution becomes difficult.
Yeah.
We find ourselves navigating environments where misalignment is normalized and where inner awareness is not part of organizational culture. The question is, do you believe there should be a second dimension to courageous wholeness? One that supports us in staying in aligned and effective, and even staying aligned and effective, even when those around us are not yet doing their inner work. How do we lead with wholeness within systems still operating from fragmentation?
I mean,
Juicy,
juicy, and
juicy.
there is no choice but to do that, to try and lead from wholeness in
Hmm.
systems
Hmm.
that have
Hmm.
not done this, like that
Hmm.
is where we are. And this work is about growing the community of individuals who see this and understand it and can work skillfully with it. And, I do want to honor, I see there's a lot popping up in the chat about there are other organizations that do this. And, I want to name shadow work is not new. There's a whole world, especially in the world of therapy and personal growth. Shadow work has been around for a long time. I do think what I'm trying to do is bring it into organizational life in a different kind of way, and also recognize that it really matters for our civic life. And this is not just a personal growth challenge or, personal transformation work. This is actually a civic challenge for the collective,
Hmm.
you know?
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's really significant, because from my vantage point, shadow work has largely been reserved for spiritual practice.
Right. That's where it lives. Yep.
Yeah, for spiritual practice within particular lineages, and
Yep.
then over the last like 2 decades, maybe more, influenced by um, spiritual traditions, but also Western psychology, Jung, as you
Mhm.
mentioned earlier,
Yep.
it's become kind of a coaching modality, and kind of like rode the coattail of the self-help movement,
Yes.
Oprah included,
Yes.
and,
Yes.
and Oprah and the likes. Thank you to all those folks. even people like Brene Brown
Oh yeah.
and others who write about shame and guilt. But I think it's important for everybody to leave with the clear contribution you're making around shadow work in the context of organizational and civic life. It's ah, very big
And
point there.
thank you for that. And a kind of practical, empirically tested approach to scaling this stuff in
Hmm.
organizations. You know,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. And a couple other questions. And so I'll read this question, and then I want to hear Sharon. I want to hear your voice. This is the question from the audience. For those of us not in the highest leadership position to make the final decision
Right.
about the approach to development, but who instead influence and suggest the way forward, what recommendations do you have to influence those senior leaders and move leadership development more deeply into the being and the be element of the flame?
Yeah. One of the principles, this is where understanding living systems versus Newtonian organizations is really important. In the Newtonian world, if you want to create change, you decide on the outcomes, you plan a process to create those outcomes, you put everybody in place. Like there's a whole way of
Hmm.
thinking about how do we design and structure this. Living
Hmm.
systems, you connect with purpose and
Hmm.
invite anybody who resonates with that purpose to gather and explore how might we experiment around this purpose.
Hmm.
And it's one of the stories
Hmm.
I talk about in the book. When I was at City Year, I was a mid-level manager, basically. Like I was not a senior person able to make these decisions, and very grateful that I had, supervisors who supported this work and gave me the kind of, leeway to move this forward. But one of the things I learned as we tried to grow this, holding these spaces across sites was it actually wasn't um, it was more important to have somebody at the site who actually cared about it, even if they were very low in the organizational
Hmm.
structure, than to have a senior person who was just implementing it as like a command from headquarters.
Hmm.
And over time, we were able to like grow the living system internally in this community of people who really appreciated and understood this until it just kind of spread across the whole organization. And there are all
Hmm.
these questions of like, how do we do this stuff in a world where people don't get it and they don't like that's the only way to do this stuff. Um,
Hmm.
and if we understand how living systems work, if you feel resonant to this, if you feel like this is a purpose that you care about, find a way to kind of say out loud, I think this is stuff we need to explore and see who shows up for that conversation. And of course, I've written this book for people who want to understand it. I'm here to be a resource to anybody who wants to try and bring this to their organization. That flame model that I shared, like it looks so simple, it's incredibly helpful at just getting people to understand, oh, there's a B level. Like
Hmm.
it took years to give people a way to understand that in a way that made sense and made it possible to talk about. So, I'm of course happy to be a resource, but start where you are and see who shows up and experiment and learn, and
Yeah, and you'll be having a series of events through the Center for Courageous Wholeness in the next like month or so. You can have like a community gathering
yes,
where you bring people together to kind of just be in community to entertain some of these concepts and skills, and then you're going to have kind of a series of workshops to help people
yeah,
kind of think about this, and then you're gonna, from what I understand, you're gonna have like a half day intensive,
yes,
yeah, so just
September
want to
3rd.
let folks know. Yeah, want to
Yeah,
let
thank
folks
you.
know that that Max is going to be hosting a lot of
Yeah, and I'll drop
gatherings.
this in the chat at the end. Of I am going to do an online retreat for anybody who wants to go deep on September 3rd. I've also created an online masterclass for anybody who
Hmm.
wants to dive into this. You can find all this on the Center for Courageous Wholeness website. I've created my Leading with Wholeness workshop, kind of the signature training. You can purchase that and go through it the way we use mythology and pop culture to invite people to confront their own shadow. So a bunch of resources. I'm trying to put as much value out there as I can for the people who are intrigued by this and want to kind of start walking the path towards courageous wholeness for themselves and their organizations.
Yeah, I think I'm excited to see how those community spaces evolve.
Yeah, well, it took me years to figure out how do you invite people to do shadow work, even in rooms that include skeptics and cynics that are not inclined to go there. And I've found it's really helpful to use mythology. I'm very influenced by Joseph Campbell, and I actually use a lot of Star Wars. I use Star Wars as a way to think about working with the dark side, which is about how do we hold our anger and our fear and our shame and all of that and work with it skillfully. And so, and again, I've put my Leading with Wholeness workshop is now on my website, and you can do that yourself. It's a 45-minute, training you can go through to see how I invite people into that. But it makes it discussable. I mean, the big thing is we can name this and we can talk about it as it's a spiritual challenge of, of course we feel angry and of course we feel grief. Anybody who is like truly awake, there's so much darkness right now. It's actually, it's the reason why I started this is there's so much shadow, there's so much darkness, and we barely even know how to talk about it, never mind how to do it skillfully. So there's hope that's a helpful answer, and there's actually some resources for you to take a deeper dive into what this looks like. Yeah, part of the challenge was if you want to make a large, a large scale capacity for inner development, this can't be about we need to hire a bunch of consultants with doctorate degrees to show up. Like we need to build an organization's internal capacity to hold these spaces for itself. And
Okay.
part of that for me is trusting that there are in every organization, there are people who are just gifted with this. Just as there are people who have other gifts around public speaking or, coming up with a good process for the organization, there are skilled facilitators. Um, and we can trust that and empower them to be the folks who hold these spaces. And then I've learned a lot. And I know, Elizabeth, you've been through our training, so you know about the way we talk about holding space and thinking about physical space and temporal space, psychological space, spiritual space, giving people kind of a way of understanding what is the work of holding space, and then a bunch of practical skills about how do we create spaces where people can really learn from each other. And those spaces are not information transfer and here's the PowerPoint. It's really we're going to hold a space for people to show up with their questions and be resources to each other. And again, I learned a lot about it along the way, but that's the work of can we help an organization create and hold spaces for itself in a scalable way consistently over time. Hope that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth, for sending you my regards. There's a question from someone that said, what is the antidote to our post-truth era? How does narrative and storytelling play into that?
Um, I read a lot of Ken Wilber and about levels of consciousness, and there's so much out there that's influenced me. I don't know if anybody's read Frederick Laloux's Reinventing Organizations, which makes a really powerful case that our organizations have evolved in ways that match our levels of the way our levels of consciousness have evolved. So when we were at a
Mm,
place where we all, kind of understood the world, we like life is about living in hierarchy and living kind of as a subservient subject to some authority figure, all of our organizations reflected that. And as we evolved to a higher consciousness, we got to this achievement place. I mean, the idea is that right now we're really in this achievement consciousness where it's all about being effective, and mastering the science, like understanding how things work and building systems that achieve more and are always growing. And we're very clearly hitting the limits of that. And I do think, they Ken Wilber talks about a teal consciousness, like an integral consciousness, which is really an ability to hold opposites skillfully with integrity, you know? And again, that's where it gets to this idea of we have to be both deeply grounded in reality and in the search for what is true about reality around us. We have to be truly curious and truly seeking to really understand what is around us. And we have to be consistently engaged in the spiritual work of being with our
Mm.
wholeness, where we live with integrity to our higher values, and do not get, there's this line of below the line. We do not start showing up from our places of grievance and fear, where we're really reactive. And, so the dual journey of working with our wholeness inside of ourselves while seeking to be deeply grounded in reality outside of us and trying to pragmatically kind of solve problems and respond to issues. That's that's where we need to get to, you know? Um, and it feels very different from this kind of, this is my tribe. I'm going to perform all kinds of rituals of being allegiant to this tribe and hating that tribe, and any fact out there that challenges my belief that I'm a good person, I'm just going to have to ignore that fact and double down on my current. All of that is the world is going crazy with all of that. So, and again, this is a process of inner transformation that we have to evolve beyond, which is why there's such an emphasis on integrating the inner and the outer and holding them together.
If I may, um, as far as what is the antidote to our post-truth era and
Yeah,
how
what
does
would you say?
narrative and storytelling play into that? I just want to be a little playful here, because I think the notion of post-truth or post-reality, those are kind of relatively helpful concepts to name the disorientation we feel with the acceleration of change, the amount of information we have to process, the fragmentation we feel in actual community, and then the ways in which our digital lives are manifest. However, if it's helpful at all, um, I don't think we've ever been in a moment of truth, in
Mm,
the sense that in the sense that to have a post-truth moment or a post-reality moment, there must have been a moment where there was consensus, there was a reality that we can all agree on, and
yeah,
I don't think we've actually ever had that.
agreed.
So sometimes these concepts are actually not helpful. They may lend to useful ways to process again the disorientation, but they might not be helpful because they inherently assume that there was a moment
Yeah,
um,
we
of,
get
of
back
of
to.
consensus. And
Mm,
but I think the second part to the question, I think, is the answer, which is, how does narrative and storytelling play into that? Meaning, for me, in a moment where there is competing truths and competing versions of reality, all of us need to become better storytellers, especially stories that are in alignment with our greatest values. And that's why courageous wholeness for me is a very useful way to discern, what is in alignment with our greatest values and what holds accountable and holds intention that which is in our shadow. And from there, we tell more powerful stories. From there, we tell more powerful narratives that may contend with half truths. So just a thought there.
I can't resist sharing what comes up for me around this, which is the noosphere and the third story, which for people who
Oh,
aren't
you
familiar,
going there? You gonna go there,
I'm going
Max?
there. Angel, you set the tone for this,
and
man. So
then
we're
and
we're
then and
doing,
then we'll hear from Bianca.
yeah, this, like, what is the biggest story we're living? And I do think one of the problems we're in is people um, they don't know. It's not clear. Like, what is the biggest story? And there used to be, the first story was, the kind of Adam and Eve, and there's that story, which still is powerful for some people, but also for a lot of people, they feel like that no longer works for me to ground myself in. And then there was the second story was Darwin, of actually all of this is just kind of purposeless evolution and things just happened for no reason. And that is spiritually hard. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
you know? But this noosphere is this idea that we are all part of the universe's process of becoming conscious of itself. And when
Hmm.
we evolve our own consciousness, when we are better able to hold the fullness of what's happening around us, we are participating in the biggest story, which is the universe becoming conscious of itself. And it puts some sacredness to our being in the work of developing ourselves and not fighting over my story is true and yours is false. And I don't know. And I find we need a deep story. Like we are spiritual beings and we are story. We understand the world through story. And I do think it's one of the reasons why I found it so powerful to ground this work in myth, because it invites in these story, the ancient wisdom. And I find every time we have a conversation about talking about shadow from this place of myth, you get the wisdom of ancient traditions from all around the world. Anybody with a background from different cultures says, "Oh, this is how my how I've been thinking about this," and just all of that ancient wisdom comes to the surface, and we just need it. One of the reasons why we're in such crisis is because we've gotten so disconnected from kind of the spiritual need to connect with that deeper wisdom and to be living a deeper story than just achieving and saving for my retirement enough. Like we just need something deeper. Anyway, I didn't
Hmm.
expect to go
No,
there,
no, no,
Angel, but
no.
you're
Yeah, I gotta pull myself from the edge right now because that's the noosphere. Those of you who want to look deeper into that, there are a few different authors that
yeah.
NOO sphere, noosphere. Rudolf Steiner, a major contributor to that concept, and but I
Compared it to
have
Chardin.
I have many, 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 many questions about the noosphere in relation to courageous wholeness, in relation to post truth, in relation to post reality,
Yeah.
in relation to this moment. So, but let me kind of come back, maybe for another, maybe we'll invite you back to the Garrison Institute.
And we're just getting started here. Yeah.
Yeah.
One simple answer is my entire career has been trying to do this work at organizations focused on service. You know, um, and I know that there's, I mentioned briefly the inner development goals and the sustainable development goals. There are all of these folks who are trying to respond to these problems who are realizing if we can't work more skillfully with the inner dimension, we're just not able to have the impact we need. And I've always said, you know, um, service without leadership development has the potential to be transactional. If you are serving others and not having a deep kind of personal experience, you could just like spend some time tutoring kids or whatever. Like it doesn't necessarily change you. And at the same time, leadership development without service can become narcissistic. If you are just, I'm pursuing a beautiful soul for the sake of having a beautiful soul without being deeply committed to being of service to others, um, it can just be narcissism and you just get lost in your own stuff, and that's why that model, that flame model, this work is grounded in what I call the dual journey. These things have to go together, you know? One of
Do
the
you?
reasons why I wrote the book is like to help people understand how these things are interconnected. And one of the things with the really practical thing is people need to feel it. And a key idea with this, I mentioned my first book is on race and social change, and I have years of studying systemic racism. And one key lesson is to create a space where the absolute ground foundational value is everybody in this space is already whole and complete and already has all they need. And from that place, which is fundamentally about not repeating any dynamics of oppression or abuse of authority, we are starting from the assumption everybody here is already fully human and whole and complete, and creating experiences where people feel that and can engage with each other from that place is feels very different from most other experiences in organizations, you know? Um, and when people feel it, then they stop asking what the hell is the relationship between my doing my inner work and my ability to, not repeat these problems or to dismantle these systems.
Mm.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Juicy, juicy, juicy. So Max, before we close out,
Yep.
any last thoughts around the book, around the center? And then I might have one more question after that.
I'm so grateful, Angel, for you for holding the space, for asking these questions, and it's really powerful to hear the kind of questions. And Bianca, I kind of wrote this book because I know a lot of people who are trying to bring inner work to organizations and failing. It just keeps hitting these resistances, and one of the reasons I wrote the book is here's one path that worked, and I hope it's of service to people who are trying to do this. And just I know this crowd at the Garrison Institute understands the inner and the outer are too interconnected to separate. The world around us is a reflection of the world within us. This community of people who get that, we need to be finding ways to bring this out to organizations to invite more people into this kind of consciousness and this commitment to integrating their own personal development with their efforts to respond to those challenges. And I said this is the way living systems work is you connect with purpose and you declare your purpose and invite anybody who cares to join. So this is me doing that. If you are really find this compelling and this resonates, please reach out to me. Please connect. And I'm finding a bunch of ways to hold spaces and just be a resource for the community of people who recognize this needs to be part of our response to this moment. Oh, you're muted, Angel, somehow.
No, I said I meant to say that I also believe in the power of communal dreaming.
Mm.
And so just wanted to hear what your dream is for the center this first year. Like where do you want to see the first what does success look like for you this first year of the center? And then just to close out, what does success look like for you in 10 years so that we can all dream,
Oh,
um, share
love you.
that dream with you.
Thank you for that. I mean, I'm really at the beginning stages, and part of it is trying to get these ideas out there as accessibly as possible. So the book,
Mhm.
getting the book out there and making sure people hear about the book is something I'm trying to do. So if anybody has organizations that want to hear about it or, opportunities to share that, I've created a bunch of online courses and will continue to create those resources for people who want to go deep into these ideas on their own. I'm going to be offering a continual series of retreats and workshops that invite people to go deeper into this. And again, I have an online one in September, and check the events on the website. There's going to be a monthly community space for people who want to be in community with others. Every month, I offer my Leading with Wholeness workshop as a way for people to engage with this. And I hope to begin consulting to organizations who want to start bringing this in. And I hope to have at least 3 organizations this first year. I hope it grows in 10 years. I have a vision of the Courageous Wholeness Conference where every organization that is doing this comes together to share their tales and to connect with other folks who are doing this kind of work. Um, and down the road, I want to start offering certification for people who want to understand, like, how do we do this work in organizations, and can I get certified to understand the model and to really be skillful, and fellowships. And I'll be honest, Angel, you're a real inspiration with what you've been doing with the Acosta Institute. It's one of the reasons I'm
Hmm.
to see that
Thank
you
you.
have found a way to bring such substantive work out into the world.
Thank you.
Listen,
Thank you.
I
Thank you.
dream of a world where every politician, every CEO, and just part of being a citizen is somebody says, "Hey, what's your shadow mission?" You can say, I've done that work. I know what my shadow is."
Mm, mm,
It's part of our
hmm
culture of everybody knows that concept and understands that work, and we hold each other accountable to
hmm
work with our wholeness.
Yeah. May it be so.
Amen.
May it be
Amen.
so. May it be so. Just inviting everybody here live and everybody watching to just, support this work. Dr. Max Klau, the Center for Courageous Wholeness. There's also an interview that um, Max and I did um, at the Acosta Institute YouTube channel. It's a deeper kind of dive into the why and the history of the courageous wholeness and also Max's legacy. So we encourage folks to watch that and just to keep an eye for some of the upcoming events that Max is going to be hosting. And yeah, always grateful that the Garrison Institute is a leading figure, continues to be a leading institution of hosting really powerful dialogue and conversations with scholars that are keeping their hearts open in times, as Naomi Wolf would once wrote, sometimes societies close.
Mm,
So that societies become closed for a moment, for a moment, for a moment, for a moment.
let us hope. Let us
And
hope the
as and
moment
as that
passes.
process happens, knowing that the pendulum will swing and things will open up, um, may our hearts not close as well. You all take good care.
If I can take 1 second,
Yes.
just make some concrete takeaways for
Oh,
anybody.
yes, please.
Some clear call to actions for anybody. First, pre-order my book. The book is actually going to be available on September 8th, and it's a big help to have a lot of pre-orders. So if you are interested in these ideas, you can pre-order it, and I dropped the link into the chat. Actually, let me share my screen here real quick. Um, and you can sign up for the Center for Courageous Wholeness mailing list. That's the way to find out about all the offers, all the opportunities, all the events coming up. And I have a bunch of online offerings. You can find it on the website, but I have a Leading with Wholeness workshop for anybody who wants to be guided through crafting their mission and their shadow mission. There's a masterclass, 6 modules, put a ton of work into really explaining all these ideas in a substantive but accessible way. And I'm offering this online retreat on September 3rd for anybody who wants to be a part of that. So a lot of ways to get involved. And I would love to hear from you. If you are intrigued, if you want to think about what it might look like to bring these to your organization or just happy to chat. So you can reach out to me at the website. And and it's very exciting. It certainly feels momentous for me to officially put this out there in the world. And I appreciate your time and interest. And I'm here to be a partner to anybody who feels called to bring this work out into the world.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much, Max. Congratulations. Thank you for inviting us into this journey, this launch. So everybody, take good care. Look out for future fellowship forums and forums at the Institute. And we look forward to being of service here and beyond. You all take good care.
Thanks, Angel. Thanks, everybody at Garrison. Appreciate you all.